allowing the state to make decisions about who should live and who should die, you don't know what kind of monster you're likely to conjure up doing that.
Hello my dears, I know, long time no see. If you are curious as to why I went MIA, I will update you at the end of this video. But for now, I would like to discuss the complex topic of euthanasia. Over on this side of the pond, there are currently talks about legalizing assisted dying. This is something that Keir Starmer seems very adamant to do. It's something that he promised he would do before he got into power, and now that he's in power, he's following through with it.
Hello?
Hello, is that Esther?
Keir Starmer hasn't given any greeting to this bill. But in March, he promised campaigner Esther Rantzen he'd allow a vote on assisted dying, undoubtedly encouraging MPs to make one happen.
I'm personally in favour of changing the law. I think we need time. We will make that commitment, Esther. I can give you that commitment right now.
And the MPs are due to debate on whether or not they should legalise this practice. Quick update, the verdict has been reached and the MPs have voted in favour of the bill. Now all of this has got me even more interested in what we're seeing happening in similar countries where this is already legal, like Canada. Now Canada made headlines around the world for its controversial MAID program, which stands for Medical Assistance in Dying. The Euthanasia program received a lot of scrutiny for how inclusive the country is beginning to make it, with the Canadian government originally making it only accessible for the terminally ill, but soon having to extend this to the disabled and people with chronic physical illnesses after being sued for discrimination.
In the first few years of assisted dying, the vast majority of cases are things like cancer, where clinicians are reasonably able to determine when the person will die.
But by early 2021, that was about to change. A group of Canadians with disabilities and chronic health conditions filed a lawsuit, arguing they should also be eligible for physician-assisted suicide.
They were living intolerable lives where they decided that at some point they would probably want to choose to die. But they couldn't do that because their deaths were not reasonably foreseeable. And their argument was that as a group, they were being discriminated against because they didn't have the same right to choose to end their suffering.
But UN experts, the Canadian Human Rights Commission, Indigenous and disability groups, and professionals across the medical community all voiced their concern over MAID's expansion beyond terminal illnesses.
We will become a place in Canada where you can receive a lethal injection before the standard of good care is actually applied if this bill passes without amendment.
Individuals are left with the prospect of choosing between an assisted death or continuing the uphill struggle of living with inadequate supports.
But the court ruled in favor of extending the right to die.
People should be able to get everything they need to live, and that should be the first priority of our government. But you can't hold the MAID system hostage because there's a lack of supports in other areas.
Now the Canadian government wants to extend the program to include the mentally ill, but as of today, this expansion has been paused. But according to the Centre of Mental Health and Addiction, this is expected to change in 2027. However, there have also been a lot of cases where people have been seeking out MAID for social reasons rather than health reasons.
Imagine choosing death over homelessness. That's what one St. Catharines man is contemplating. Tonight on City News, we continue to delve into medically assisted dying and how some believe it is their only option to living in poverty.
Are you afraid to die?
Who isn't? Yeah,
Amir Farsood has applied for medically assisted dying, known as MAID. He lives in constant agony due to a back injury, but has started the process for end of life because his rooming house is up for sale and he can't find anywhere else to live that he can afford. He barely survives on Ontario disability support payments, which are just over $1,200 a month. He doesn't want to die, but being homeless is not an option.
I know in my present health condition I wouldn't survive it anyway.
Farsood meets the criteria for MAID: physical suffering due to disability that cannot be relieved. His doctor, who knows Farsood's real reason for MAID is his fear of being homeless, signed off on the application in August. Farsood needs a second to do the same. There's a 90-day waiting period. He believes he could potentially access MAID in about a month.
And this doesn't seem to be an isolated incident. There have been reports of many cases where the safeguards for MAID were not followed, enabling it to be provided to people for reasons outside of this legal criteria.
Oh, hi, Rosina. This is Terry. I'm with the Provincial Program for Medical Assistance in Dying.
Okay.
Okay, and doctor, I just spoke with him. He said he booked a procedure date for you.
Before Rosina died, she gave Naeem access to her email and social media accounts so he could share her story. He found this email.
The subject line was, "Why I want MAID ASAP and what needs to be done. Please keep all this secret while I'm still alive because there are things that would cause a MAID application to be declined, such as suffering I experience is mental suffering, not physical. Dealing with healthcare providers who refuse to take the suffering away when they can. Constant worrying about not having food to eat."
She's saying here that she wants to keep this secret because she knew that wasn't a qualification.
Right.
And she says, I think if more people cared about me, I might be able to handle the suffering caused by my physical illness alone. It's just loneliness. It's isolation and it's poverty.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
The MAID system is supposed to not let this happen.
Yeah.
This has raised many concerns, with suspicions rising about what the true intentions behind MAID really are, with some believing that it's just undercover eugenics.
Heather, when were you first made aware of the existence of MAID being offered by the government?
I was like all ears as soon as they introduced the legislation. The disabled community saw the threat right away.
Threat of eugenics?
Yeah, exactly. They'll start with the terminally ill, of course, but that's just the start off point. 2017, I started to have issues where I was having muscle spasms that started from my low back and would fire straight down to my toes and would basically lock up every muscle between those 2 points. So, second hospitalization, I had a hospitalist, which is a doctor that works in the hospital, approach me and ask if I had ever considered asking for MAID. The first time I was just stunned. I'm asking for pain control, not for death. My unfavorite nurse was on and I had to use the bathroom, so I rang for that and she came. I got back to the bed with no assistance from her. As she was putting the side rolls up, she said, "Have you ever considered MAID? Because this isn't quality of life, this is existing." And I just said to her, "You don't get to make that call." She said, "Well, if I were in your position, I'd take it in a heartbeat."
Jeez.
And I said, "The answer is no. God put me on this earth and he's the only one taking me home." And then she said, "Now you're being selfish." That was like, whoa, this is going somewhere not good fast.
Yeah. You mentioned that you were offered MAID in every other region of Canada?
Yeah, I was offered it twice in BC or British Columbia, once in Alberta, which is in Saskatchewan, and I thankfully have had really good care here so far. It's more prevalent than you would ever imagine.
These are concerns that have also been raised by some here in the UK about the potential risks of legalising this practice.
Miro Griffiths has been disabled since childhood. His breathing and swallowing will eventually deteriorate. He worries assisted dying will devalue living.
Do you think it's possible at all to design a law that protects any vulnerability you might feel whilst also preventing people from going through pain that they don't want to have to endure at the end of their lives?
In my view, there's no possible law, mainly because it's incompatible with disabled people's rights. As a disabled person, you spend a lot of your time in states of worry and panic. You're thinking about your support being taken away. You're thinking about the struggles you'll have to access in trying to participate in your community. Disabled people have been arguing for dignity in life. We don't have dignity in life. And now we're subjected to a conversation about, well, ignore dignity in life and let's focus on dignity in death.
And considering what we've seen happen in Canada, where people with disabilities who aren't even seeking MAID are being offered MAID or having MAID pushed onto them, his concerns don't seem that unreasonable. Some also believe that MAID is the Canadian government's solution to its overwhelmed healthcare system.
There's been instances here where people have to wait up to 5 years for treatment, but they can have MAID in 91 days.
So it would take longer for them to get the medical treatment they needed than to kill themselves.
Exactly. It's our government. And to get rid of people that have chronic conditions that use up a lot of healthcare dollars. People that they see as non-contributing members of society. So the homeless are being targeted, elderly are being targeted, mentally ill are being targeted, though they say they're on hold, but it's just really just a facade. I also couldn't find proof of this, so I can't back it up, but there's also organ donations have gone up exponentially since MAID. That's one of the last things they ask the family is if they'll donate their organ.
They repeatedly, I think it's 3 times, ask you about organ donation because they want to have the organs of these people who are too poor. And so what does that make it that the rich are, too rich to die and that the poor are too poor to live? It just becomes a second-tier healthcare system in itself.
I do have to admit, it is quite concerning that the countries with overwhelmed healthcare systems are suddenly interested in legalizing assisted dying, as it's no secret that over here in the UK, we also have our own problems with our healthcare service. The topic of euthanasia has always been a very tricky one, especially when it comes to figuring out how to strike the balance between those who are suffering from terminal illnesses and want this as an option to shorten their suffering, while also preventing it from being corrupted, with some viewing the whole thing as just a Pandora's box that should never be opened at all, and often holding Canada up as an example of what can go wrong. It's understandable why some people view assisted dying as a Pandora's box, because ultimately the question becomes whose suffering matters, a debate the Canadian government found itself in when it was sued by those with disabilities and chronic illnesses. So it's unsurprising that eventually mental health will come down the pipeline for Canada. After all, who is to say physical suffering is the only suffering that matters? What about mental suffering? An argument the CEO of Dying with Dignity is already making.
You might have a person who's got tens of years of mental illness challenges, who's tried every treatment, electric shock therapy, medications, counseling, all of those things, and they have been unable to get any relief from their mental disorder. Just because their suffering is mental doesn't make it any less important or less severe than if it's a physical suffering. Those individuals need to have the opportunity to ask if they want to and to be assessed.
Programs like MAID would be extremely desirable to those who are already at the lowest point in their struggle with mental health, and the guilt that comes with doing it yourself is removed when you view it as a normalized health procedure carried out by doctors. There's something about viewing things as just medical procedures that desensitizes people, similar to how we've largely been desensitized from abortion for similar reasons. Now, I don't mention abortion to enter the debate about its morality. I mention it simply because I think abortion gives us some foreshadowing into what the future of assisted dying could potentially look like in years to come. I see a lot of overlap in the arguments, from Dying with Dignity using the motto, "It's your life, your choice," which sounds very similar to "my body, my choice." And when people argue in favour of abortion, they very often use the most extreme examples to explain why it should be legal, when the vast majority of women do not have terminations for those reasons. Over time, it has essentially become something women can have on demand. And for the most part, in countries where it's legal, people are largely desensitized from it. I think that with time, something similar could potentially happen with euthanasia, where we see that the most extreme examples are pushed forward for why it should be legal, which will largely help it to become legal because most people do sympathize with those reasons. And with time, if people become more and more accepting of assisted dying, it will likely also be something that eventually people can have on demand. I suppose we don't really need to imagine it, since there are countries years ahead of us and Canada when it comes to how long they've had assisted dying, and as expected, they have largely been desensitized from it.
The debate in Belgium has moved on so far that today, here on the streets, it is barely a debate. For 22 years, assisted dying, including now medically assisted suicide, has been so normal that almost 3,500 people chose it last year, including some not terminally ill. One party in the Belgian parliament is pressing to make it even easier still, to give those with dementia more power to choose the time of their death.
We start from a liberal principle, that is that you decide for yourself about your life. When a person is in pain or suffering, and this is a state of mind that continues for years, yes, we think that a person that wants to end his life should have the chance to do so.
Even if they're not about to die, naturally.
Even then,
Eline Vervat was injected with lethal drugs at her own request last year. She was 24 and suffered from crippling depression. Her parents, Karen and Dirk, keep her bedroom as it was that day. She was allowed to choose to die.
I think this euthanasia was a much better option than she go to the train or something else.
Impossibly difficult as it must be, they have accepted that after a 6-year illness and 3 years of psychiatric reports, it was her choice.
It was planned on a Sunday morning. She came out of her room with a smile from here to here. She was so happy. It's very strange.
Because that was the day she was going to die.
You could ask her to live longer and be unhappy, just because we like that. But seeing her unhappy doesn't make us happy also.
Fernand Coulineau is a lawyer who's long warned the laws have expanded way beyond what the original legislation intended. Inevitable, he says, however tightly you try to define assisted dying.
So it was a decriminalization, not a right. It rather quickly went from decriminalization to a right. It developed very fast from the last resort to the first question. I know a number of elderly people in hospitals, and day 3 of their stay in the hospital, someone came along and asked, did you already think about the possibility of euthanasia?
There are certainly many questions to consider when it comes to assisted dying, and if we're going to have this debate, I guess we just need to be honest about the reality of what we are debating. Are we going to legalize this practice with the acceptance and the understanding that with time, it will not only be the terminally ill who will take this route if it's available? Ultimately, a trade-off has to be made. Do we deny the terminally ill the option of euthanasia and the option to shorten their suffering to prevent potentially opening up a Pandora's box? Or do we give them the option of euthanasia with the understanding that Pandora's box will be opened and likely, like we've seen in other countries, these restrictions will likely loosen with time? This topic is definitely not black and white. I can definitely see why someone would be on either side of this debate, because ultimately one side is arguing, why should we dictate what you should and shouldn't do with your own body or your life? No one should be forced to live a life that causes them suffering. While the other would say we are failing to help the most vulnerable by simply allowing them to self-delete instead of giving them the support and care that they need. But I would like to know what you think about this. Do you think legalizing euthanasia is a good thing? All opinions are of course always welcome. Do make sure to tell me why. As I try to figure out my own opinion on this, hearing how people came to their own conclusions is always really interesting to me. In regards to me going MIA, nothing crazy really happened, to be honest. I just became very, very busy, and I've never really been someone who posted for the sake of posting or posted for the sake of staying in the algorithm or whatever. If I don't feel that I can put 100% effort and thought into my content, then I just would rather wait until a time comes where I can, because there was just a lot of things happening back to back, from my wedding to moving home. I also had a baby, which is really exciting stuff. I am now a mum, you guys. So motherhood has really just been my main time consumer at the moment. But so far I've been loving motherhood. It's honestly amazing. I find the whole experience just so interesting. That's basically where I've been, and I know this video is very unusual for me because, you know, my face is nowhere to be seen, but realistically, I'm just gonna be honest with you guys, I think I'm gonna have a mixture of these kind of voiceover style videos and as well as like my normal face or talking head, whatever you want to call it, type videos, just because it just makes it easier, especially now that I have a little baby. But these ones are a lot easier to edit and stuff, and so I think that this is how we're gonna do it. I hope you can bear with me, and I hope you've all been good and you've all been healthy and well. I don't know what else to say. It's good to be back. But that is all for this video. I'm gonna end it now because I'm just rambling. As I said, do let me know what you think personally about euthanasia and your reasons why you have those views, because like I said, it's a very interesting topic and I can understand why people would kind of be split on this. So I would love to know your thoughts. So let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for giving me your time today. day, and I will see you in my next video.